Today we gather to witness a baptism. Actually, two baptisms. First, there's the baptism of Jesus, and we're witnessing that baptism in the gospel today from Matthew. It's a very short description of a very important event. Jesus presents himself to John at the River Jordan, and he plunges, Jesus does, into those river waters. And as he comes up out of the water, according to Matthew's gospel, the heavens open and the Spirit of God descends upon him. And with that Spirit, Jesus receives God's power. All of God's power for the work that God calls Jesus to do, that saving work, that healing work in the world in his ministry. And a voice from heaven is heard. Jesus hears it. The people there at the baptism, they hear it. And the voice says, "This is my beloved, with whom I am well pleased." In that baptism, there is an epiphany, and we are in the midst of Epiphany season. There is that manifestation of God's light in Jesus. This baby will bear the light of God in the world. In the darkness, God will shine his light into the world, and God will dispel all of that darkness. And that work of dispelling the darkness begins with Jesus' baptism, and it will continue throughout his ministry, and it will continue beyond his resurrection through his body, his living body, which is the church. The second baptism today is that of young Maxwell, who looks adorable in that historic baptismal gown, which is, I'm told, 150 years old. A lot of people have been baptized in that gown. And this is an important day for this young man, because in holy baptism, he will become a member of Christ's living body. And at his baptism today, he will receive a candle. And I forgot to mention this, Sarah and Chad and godparents, but I mentioned it earlier at the 9 o'clock service. I always encourage the baptismal candidate's family members to, on the day of his baptism, the anniversary of his baptism, to light that candle. Now, his birthday cake will have candles on it, and so that's a way of marking that anniversary. And so it's entirely appropriate to mark his anniversary of his baptism, his becoming a member of Christ's living body, the church, by lighting his baptismal candle. And when I present that candle to him, I will say, "Maxwell, Jesus is the light of the world, and you are the light of Christ in the world, and shine with that light," or words to that effect. Today we see in Jesus' baptism God shining his light into the world. And his light is that light of love for all humankind. It is the light that transforms lives and transforms this creation. And his ministry, Jesus' work in the world, is that work of bringing light into the darkness, bringing love to where there is the absence of love, bringing hope to where there is despair, bringing food to where there is hunger, bringing healing to where there is brokenness, bringing acceptance to where there has been rejection, bringing God's love to the world, bringing God's light into a dark world. That's what Jesus does for us. And in our baptisms, we are have committed ourselves to following Jesus and to bearing the light of Christ in the world. And that baptismal covenant, which we're going to renew in just a minute or two, that baptismal covenant, it outlines exactly what we are to do as the followers of Jesus, how we are to be His light in the world, how we are, as it were, to carry our baptismal candle with us, what we're to do. We are, the baptismal covenant says, we are to resist evil, we are to strive for justice and peace, we are to work for the good of others, we are to love our neighbors as ourselves, we are to respect the dignity of every human being, and anything and everything that we ever encounter that is contrary to those promises that we make in our baptismal covenant, we are to resist. The baptismal covenant says we are to resist evil. We are, as St. Luke says in the Acts of the Apostles, we are to do what Jesus does in His ministry. And Jesus, Luke tells us, went about doing good. Jesus, Luke tells us today, Jesus healed all those who were oppressed by the devil. Wherever we see people who are oppressed, wherever we see people who are crushed, as it were, under the heel of Satan, we are to act and we are to break that oppression. We are to do the work of Christ in the world. And the only people Christ has to do His work in the world, look around. We're it. We're it. The only Jesus people will know is the Jesus we show people through our work in the world, through our faithfulness to Him. The only light people will see will be the light that we're bearing. The only love people will know is our love. I want to tell you a story, a brief story, about how, and this is just one example of dozens of examples of ways that people in this church are bearing the light of Christ and loving others, loving their neighbors as themselves. There is a man in our congregation who was hungry, and we were concerned that he was not getting regular nutrition. And a group of women in this congregation, they heard about that. And they decided to do something. They decided to love this man. They decided to show the light of Christ to him. And so they made food, they made meals, and they delivered to him those meals and made sure that his freezer was full of food and that he was eating regularly. More than just simply deliver food, though, they, as it were, delivered love. They delivered companionship to someone who was alone. They sat and visited with him. This man knows that Jesus is alive. This man knows the light of Christ through members of this congregation. Another example, there's Mary Luke there. Mary Luke and her team of, would you call them knitters? I don't know the terminology, Mary, so you'll just have to be patient with me. But they have been busy working, and they have created these prayer stoles right here, and they're as big as blankets. And those prayer stoles will be delivered to people in the congregation and elsewhere. They will wrap themselves in those prayer stoles. They will wrap themselves in our prayers, the prayers of Mary and her team. And they will wrap themselves in the love of God in Jesus Christ because of members of this congregation, because of your faithfulness to your baptismal covenant. So thank you for that. And thank you, all the members of Christ Church, for your faithfulness to your baptismal covenant and to living out the light of Christ in the world. Today we hear God say of Jesus, "This is my beloved Son, my chosen, whom I delight in." And I know that when the time comes, and we hope it is eons from now, when the time comes for us to gather there before God on the day of our judgment, I know what you're going to hear because of the people you are. You're going to say, you, Christ Church, the members of Christ Church, you are my chosen ones. You are my beloved. Welcome. Welcome to my kingdom, and share with me in my love eternally. Amen.